In the heart of France's Loiret region, the air carries the smell of wood and vinegar from the age-old workshops of Boigny-sur-Bionne. This small, centuries-old town, not far from Orléans, became the backdrop today for a message that reached far beyond the French countryside. It was here that France's Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot, stepped before the cameras to deliver a plea, one that echoed across continents, an urgent call for peace in Sudan. Barrot arrived at the Martin-Pourret vinegar factory, a landmark of local craftsmanship whose barrels once supplied the Élysée Palace itself. Around him, cameras clicked as he greeted factory workers, spoke with the director of the iconic glassware maker Duralex, and toured the production lines where traditional Orléans vinegar matures in oak barrels. Yet beneath the hum of industry, the minister's mind and message were on a humanitarian crisis unfolding thousands of kilometres away. Standing beside the factory's polished bottles, stamped with the label Vinaigre d'Orléans, Barrot's expression turned solemn. He spoke of Sudan, where conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces has driven millions from their homes and devastated entire provinces. For the past few days, he said, the situation has been worsening in Sudan with the fall of the city of El Fasher in Darfur, and with fears fueled by a number of seemingly established facts of major atrocities affecting thousands, tens of thousands, or even more of innocent civilians who are once again forced to flee. His voice tightened as he added, I would like to remind you that there are tens of millions of displaced people in Sudan who have had to leave their homes over the past 2 years. Barrott's tone was that of both diplomat and humanitarian, measured yet urgent. He spoke on behalf of France, but with an appeal aimed at all warring factions. On this occasion, he continued, I was able to send a clear message on behalf of France to the belligerents so that they respect international law, international humanitarian law, and allow humanitarian aid to flow into Sudan for the benefit of the populations in need. He didn't stop there. His words turned toward the global stage. A message also to third-party powers, to the states that indirectly support the belligerents and thus fuel the conflict. The minister's remarks reflected France's broader diplomatic posture, an insistence that no side can claim legitimacy while violating international norms. It is now necessary, he declared firmly, for both belligerents to cease fire and comply with international law, to international humanitarian law, to put a definitive end to this tragedy. Beyond the microphones, France's call resonates with a wider international concern. Since April 2023, Sudan's war has spiraled into one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. The fall of El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, has triggered mass exodus across the Sahel. Entire towns are emptied, hospitals stand abandoned, aid convoys risk ambush as they attempt to deliver food, medicine and shelter. The United Nations warns that famine now looms over millions. Against this backdrop, Barrott's words, spoken amid the clinking of vinegar bottles and the calm of rural France, carried a weight born of moral urgency. His visit to Loiret was not limited to diplomacy. It was also a showcase of local enterprise and heritage, the kind of regional visit French ministers use to connect national policy with community life. In the factory's maturation cellar, Barrot paused beside a barrel stamped Présidence de la République. The inscription served as a quiet reminder of continuity. Even in times of international upheaval, the symbols of French craftsmanship remain tied to the nation's highest office. Workers guided the minister through aisles of wooden casks, each labelled by origin and date, their contents destined for kitchens and dining tables across the country. It was a simple scene, but it underscored the contrast between peace at home and turmoil abroad. Later that morning, Barrot's motorcade made its way to the city of Orléans, where he was greeted by Regional President François Bonneau at the gates of the Jean Zay High School. There, beneath the red and blue flags fluttering in the autumn breeze, students gathered in the courtyard to hear him speak. The minister thanked them for their attention, using the occasion to draw a link between civic education and global awareness. You are the generation, he told them, that must understand the world as it is. Interconnected, fragile, but full of opportunity. Cameras panned across attentive faces as he discussed the importance of European unity, humanitarian values, and the defence of democracy. His words sought to bridge local identity with international responsibility, but as his visit continued, another issue captured his outrage, one far removed from the battlefields of Sudan, yet deeply tied to questions of morality and regulation in a digital world. Barrot addressed recent revelations that certain online marketplaces were selling what he described as child pornography dolls. His tone hardened. "I want to express my anger after learning of the marketing of child pornography dolls on certain major distribution platforms," he said. "This is completely unacceptable and raises the question more generally of how the European single market, including our domestic market, is being flooded with counterfeit products. And this is also the case with certain Duralex products." The comment struck at a larger debate raging within the European Union: how to police online commerce giants whose platforms allow morally and legally questionable goods to circulate freely across borders. Barrot's explicit mention of Shein, the Chinese retail behemoth, underscored France's growing willingness to confront global e-commerce actors over ethical standards. In recent months, Paris and Brussels have tightened scrutiny of digital marketplaces, from counterfeit fashion to unsafe electronics. But the minister's condemnation marked a new frontier, one that blends human rights enforcement with consumer protection. His remarks drew widespread reaction. French advocacy groups called for immediate investigations and for European commissioners to strengthen child protection mechanisms online. Within hours, members of parliament echoed Barrot's concern, demanding tougher sanctions against platforms found complicit in what they described as digital exploitation. In Loiret, the minister's denunciation found sympathetic ears among factory workers who, while producing glass and vinegar, spoke proudly of craftsmanship rooted in human dignity, the polar opposite of anonymous mass production and moral negligence. Back on the diplomatic front, Barrot's words on Sudan align with France's recent efforts to coordinate with partners in the European Union and African Union. Paris has pressed for a unified ceasefire appeal, coupled with sanctions against those obstructing humanitarian corridors. French military and humanitarian agencies remain active in neighbouring Chad and South Sudan, where hundreds of thousands of refugees have crossed the border. At the same time, France has worked with the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs to expand relief delivery through airdrops and cross-border logistics. Barrot's speech served as both a policy statement and a moral call, a reminder that Europe's foreign policy must blend firmness with compassion. In the following hours, television crews captured the contrast between two worlds: the clatter of Orléans school courtyard, filled with youthful optimism, and the minister's solemn warnings about a faraway war. The editing of the footage intercut smiling students with images from Sudan, satellite photos of scorched villages, long lines of displaced families under makeshift shelters, and aid convoys moving through desolate terrain. The juxtaposition gave visual life to Barrot's message that peace and responsibility are universal, that complacency in one corner of the world allows suffering in another. Throughout the visit, Barrot maintained his characteristic composure, calm, articulate, and resolutely European. Yet his words carried undertones of frustration. France has long advocated for international coordination on Sudan, but diplomatic progress remains slow. The Security Council remains divided, with some powers accused of fueling the war through indirect support or arms sales. By directly naming third-party powers in his remarks, Barrot signalled that Paris is willing to confront uncomfortable truths, that the Sudanese conflict, like many before it, survives on external backing. Analysts in Paris note that the Foreign Minister's statement fits into a broader pattern of French diplomacy under President Emmanuel Macron's administration, a strategy of moral multilateralism, seeking to reassert Europe's voice in crises where global governance appears paralysed. From Ukraine to the Sahel, France's message has been consistent, defending international law, humanitarian aid access, and the protection of civilians. In Sudan's case, that message faces the daunting reality of limited influence on the ground. Still, Barrot's appeal adds weight to a chorus calling for negotiations, not escalation. As the day in Loiret drew to a close, local journalists captured final images of Barrot posing with elected officials outside the Martin Pourret factory. The camera lingered on the inscription above the façade, "Depuis 1797, a quiet reminder of endurance and tradition. Around him stood workers, community leaders, and reporters, ordinary people witnessing the intersection of local life and global politics. In the evening, as footage aired on French television, commentators reflected on the symbolism of the moment. A French minister standing in a vinegar factory, a site of patience, preservation, and transformation, using that setting to call for the end of senseless bloodshed thousands of kilometres away. The metaphor was not lost on viewers. Just as vinegar requires time and care to mature, peace too demands patience and the courage to uphold principle over convenience. In his closing remarks to the press, Barrot returned to a theme that defines his political identity: France's responsibility to speak when conscience demands it. "We cannot remain silent," he said in an off-camera exchange recorded later by journalists. "Diplomacy is not only about interests, it is about values. And in Sudan, as in every conflict, we must choose humanity." That sentiment, simple yet profound, captured the essence of the day. A journey that began in the calm of Loiret had become a platform for France to project compassion and moral clarity. From the clinking of glass bottles in a factory shop to the crowded classrooms of Orléans, Jean-Noël Barrot's message travelled through every frame: cease the violence, protect the innocent, defend human dignity. By nightfall, the story had moved across news networks. In Khartoum, aid groups welcomed France's renewed engagement. In Brussels, diplomats discussed ways to translate words into coordinated action. And in the quiet town where the day had begun, the lights of the vinegar factory glowed against the autumn dusk, silent witnesses to a day when France once again spoke out for peace.
Alors, Monsieur Marciano, le plan...
C'est bien parti.
On est à 1 million là.
Déjà?
À l'instant où je vous parle, on est à 1 million.
Magnifique.
1,6 million.
D'accord.
On a 1388 participants. Depuis
Orléans ayant été pendant très longtemps, depuis le XVe siècle, la capitale historique du vinaigre, puisque très vite on a planté des vignes, la demande étant tellement folle.
Ah ouais?
Mardi, on s'est et on privatise le lieu, on organise une chaîne pendant 3 semaines. Fermentation qui va se faire avec une bactérie assez avec la portinée. Et en fait, non, on a réussi à créer un monument Orléans pour continuer à l'alimenter. C'est un petit peu comme un levain pour un boulanger.
C'est une expérience sensorielle, monsieur.
Donc là, vous avez peut-être reconnu déjà quelques jolis noms. Dans cette pièce.
Le millésime fait partie d'un élément de vente ou...
Alors, à l'évoquer, le travail qu'on a fait avec le Ritz, par exemple, était un travail extraordinaire.
Très fin, c'est quelques microns. Et justement, le travail du vinaigrier, c'est de s'assurer que ça marche correctement.
La vigne qui nous sépare. Mais c'est pas beau ça comme symbole.
En vrai, je pense que t'as pas besoin de te casser la tête. On va s'ouvrir sur l'international.
Donc c'est un moment de partage qui sera, je n'en doute pas, un moment important pour vous et important pour nous. Merci.
Pour vous parler un peu de ce que nous faisons au ministère de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères. On prescrit l'usage de la force pour mettre fin à un conflit. Deuxième, toutes ces idées que vous avez évoquées, elles sont au cœur de la mission du ministère. Un modèle différent, alors nous pourrons être suivis. Mais la première des choses, c'est qu'il faut se renforcer les otages et permettre l'acheminement massif de l'aide humanitaire. Pourquoi? Question des mobilités, des migrations, que se posent les questions de coopération économique. La France, je l'espère très vivement, continuera à défendre très longtemps après. Une fois qu'on est rentré dans l'Union européenne, continue de respecter les grands principes.
Et... parler du fait que les valeurs démocratiques elles sont très importantes de l'Union européenne.
Sudan, with the fall of the city of El Fasher in Darfur, and with fears fueled by a number of seemingly established facts of major atrocities affecting thousands, tens of thousands, or even more of innocent civilians who are once again forced to flee. I would like to remind you that there are tens of millions of displaced people in Sudan who have had to leave their homes over the past 2 years.
Au Soudan, plusieurs dizaines de millions de personnes déplacées qui ont dû, depuis 2 ans, quitter leur foyer.
On this occasion, I was able to send a clear message on behalf of France to the belligerents so that they respect international law, international humanitarian law, and allow humanitarian aid to flow into Sudan for the benefit of the populations in need. A message also to third-party powers, to the states that indirectly support the belligerents and thus fuel the conflict.
Aux États qui soutiennent indirectement les belligérants et qui alimentent ainsi le conflit.
It is now necessary for both belligerents to cease fire and comply with international law, to international humanitarian law, to put a definitive end to this tragedy. I want to express my anger after learning of the marketing of child pornography dolls on certain major distribution platforms. This is completely unacceptable and raises the question, more generally, of how the European single market, including our domestic market, is being flooded with counterfeit products. And this is also the case with certain Duralex products.
La question, plus généralement, de la manière dont le marché unique européen, dont notre marché intérieur, est envahi par des produits contrefaits. Et c'est le cas d'ailleurs de certains produits de Duralex.